Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. The trade broke last Thursday that the Chicago Bulls finally, after years of stagnancy, are making a move, and yet still not a lot of excitement surrounding what took place for Chicago. So this took place on Thursday afternoon. It is just a one-for-one deal. The Thunder are sending Chicago Josh Giddey in exchange for Alex Caruso. And when this broke out, immediately everybody on social media started killing the Bulls for this deal, considering the fact that they are buying in on Josh Giddey after his value is never been lower since he entered the NBA, and I think he was the 2021 draft, the 6th overall pick, and in exchange, they gave up a fan favorite role player in Alex Caruso, who has had back-to-back all defensive seasons. Not to mention the fact that Caruso, at age 30, showed that he has some maybe offensive, at least he's improving on his offensive upside, averaged a career high in points per game with a career high field goal percentage. So again, a one-for-one deal here. I do think that, considering the fact that Oklahoma City has all of this extra draft capital, people were really mad that the Bulls couldn't get any sort of draft compensation in exchange for this deal, when ultimately, I do think when you look at the two player profiles, it didn't necessarily warrant an extra pick alongside a young piece for an older player in Alex Caruso, who is going to be on an expiring contract this year, and they're going to have to pay right away. But again, the fact that the Thunder have all of these extra draft picks make it seem like maybe the Bulls should have gotten something there, at least somewhere in the negotiation process, get even a second round pick in there. But that is probably an unfair way to view this. But this is the first player for player trade the Bulls have made since 2021. At that point, I believe it was the Lauri Markkanen deal or Nikola Vucevic. It was one of those. So we're going on years where the Bulls have not acquired a player in a trade. And again, the overall perception of this is you are moving on from a fan favorite in exchange for somebody who has some potential character issues. Now, we're not going to dive into all of the off the court stuff with Josh Giddey, but he was, again, believe what you would like out of it. He was ruled innocent, no punishment from the NBA or law enforcement, but I do think that incident absolutely has a big impact on the way that we view this trade. And it's something that you are very fair to consider, but if we're talking just from a basketball standpoint, I actually like this deal for the Bulls a lot more than it sounds like the majority of people do. People are very caught up on the fact that, especially, this has just been a disastrous year for Giddey, where he had the off-the-court issues, and the last time we saw him, he was borderline unplayable against the Mavericks in the conference semifinals. But I think that if you can look past that to the point where, Giddey had sort of been outshined in his original situation where he was supposed to come in as the true point guard for Oklahoma City. He was going to be an on-the-ball guy, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, rightfully so, because he is miles better than Giddey, but SGA sort of came in and took away that responsibility, and Giddey had to be a little bit of a stand-in-the-corner guy, and that was just never going to work. We understand the shooting is a massive weakness for Giddey, so that's why when you look at the Mavericks series, he was almost the perfect player for the Mavericks to go up against, where their whole defensive strategy was, we're going to protect the paint, and we are going to massively help off of a non-shooter to put our center just camping in the paint. And that's exactly what they did. Giddey never made them pay, and it wasn't just him. We also saw, that Thunder team that was incredible three-point shooting during the regular season. They just didn't necessarily have that in this series, and it was just a really bad look for Giddey, and it was clear that they were going to have to part ways. Now, it sounds like behind the scenes, what sort of forced this deal to get done is the Thunder had proposed that Josh Giddey was going to come off of the bench next year as the sixth man, and Giddey he wasn't bought in on that idea. He wanted to be traded, and for the Thunder, I think everybody is consensus agreement that this is a pretty great deal for the Thunder, where you add, an elite perimeter defender and somebody who can knock down his open looks in exchange for a piece that clearly didn't fit into what they were trying to run there last season. And, they needed a little bit more of some veteran presence possibly. And again, Giddey is going into his age 22 season. So as much as it's an upgrade for the Thunder, I like, at least, it depends on where the Bulls choose to go from here. If they commit to a rebuild, though, I see no reason why Josh Giddey can't be a centerpiece of what they continue to build. Like, Giddey, as an on-the-ball, ball handler in terms of his playmaking and everything, and I know there's the clip of, his errant passes that's going viral right now, but Giddey was a really good player for his first couple years, and at 22 years old, I'm just not going to be ready to fully write him off, especially after seeing a bunch of the high flashes. Now, again, it depends on what the Bulls are going to do here, because they have been content with being mediocre for a number of years now. It's almost like the organization just wants to continue selling out tickets because they're in Chicago. They know they have an extremely loyal fan base. They're in the conversation as to making the playoffs, but 2 years in a row now, they have exited in the play-in tournament, which is disappointing. Of course, if you're a Bulls fan, I'm sure you're entirely frustrated with it. Just pick a direction. And I do think that this is a step in the right direction for the Bulls if they are going to choose and commit to playing out a rebuild here, where there's a ton of top-end talent actually in the 2025 class. Obviously, if you're a Bulls fan, you don't want to be thinking about 2025 rookies right now, but do you want to think about another 3 years of watching DeRozan, LaVine, and Vucevic playing alongside one another? I just don't think that that's going to get you anywhere. Now, DeMar is an upcoming free agent, so for the right price, I still think DeRozan is a productive NBA player and that he can fit in and contribute to winning basketball in a number of different places. Now, as good as some of the clutch stats were, I also felt like last year it was driving me a little bit crazy how much everything revolved around him, and yet there were a number of times where he was able to shine. So I don't know, I just feel like I can see that translating to an actual winning team other than this mediocre Bulls team. And you probably want to dump Vucevic as well. Zach LaVine, on the contract that he's currently on, maybe it sounds like they've been making calls relentlessly to try and make sure that to try and dump LaVine, get anything they can for him, and potentially lean into this rebuild idea. Now, with LaVine coming off of this injury, his stock has probably never been lower, and unlike Giddey, who's on this rookie deal, who now the Bulls are going to have control over for the next 5 to 6 seasons if they would like to. With LaVine, he is 30 years old-ish, and he has all of these years at an extremely expensive price, and no team is going to be just sort of semi-willing to take that on, especially under this new CBA where you get penalized so heavily for the second threshold of the luxury tax situation. So that he's probably somebody they look to move, if they are going to move him, around the trade deadline or so, hope that he can build up some of that stock once again. But I really don't mind this trade whatsoever for the Bulls. Again, I understand for PR purposes, for a couple different reasons, it is not a super exciting move, especially when you're coming off of 3 years now, basically, where they haven't made an actual trade in terms of, acquiring a player. That it definitely feels like it's a little underwhelming when you have zero draft capital attached when you're making a deal with the team that has basically half the league's draft capital. But still, I stand by the Bulls just need to pick a direction. And Josh Giddey, if that's your rebuilding plan, I really do think that there is something there. Now, how he's going to fit in with Kobe White, Ayo Dosunmu, is definitely a question there, because there's a number of, semi-talented guards there already. And again, I'm not saying that the full blueprint is laid out in front of us yet, but if the Bulls can actually pick a direction here, and I'm not saying they need to entirely blow up the whole thing, if things end up working out there, I mean, we've seen Giddey play winning basketball before, and so be it, but they need to actually find a way to, get out of this sub 500 pattern where they are just going out in the play-in tournament and kind of putting their fan base through it, because the Chicago Bulls organization should be more than that. And I think it's fun when they are relevant, but that just hasn't been the case in a number of years now. And I think that this is maybe the right step. As for the Thunder, very quickly here, like I talked about, I'm definitely a fan of this deal for the Thunder. I think he plays in perfectly to what they're trying to do. They're a team that, yes, they're young, they can shoot and everything, but it is the switchability that they have and the number of different defenders they can put out there. No weak spots, sort of built similar to the Celtics. You bring in Alex Caruso, and maybe he's a little bit older than Derek White when the Celtics traded for that, but that's kind of the similarity here where you can point to that. I think he's going to be excellent for OKC, and the Thunder, I still feel like they are probably a move or two away from being, favorites in that Western Conference. I think that they need to address the big man position one way or another, at least to have a backup option behind Chet, but I am definitely sold on what that organization is doing, and also considering the fact that, for whatever it's worth, they didn't give up any picks. They didn't necessarily get bullied into, oh, well, you have all these picks anyways, just throw one in there with it. That's not how this works. Sam Presti is one of the best general managers in the NBA, and I thought they made out really well yet again. But let me know what your thoughts on that are. We're going to be moving on to a hire that took place this morning. We talked about JJ Redick to the Lakers earlier in the show. This time it is the Cleveland Cavaliers who have just hired their replacement after firing JB Bickerstaff at the end of the playoffs this year. So we're going to be diving into that. Stick with us and we will be right back. Don't go anywhere.